My ex listed our dog in the divorce papers like furniture. They didn't write companion or family, they wrote asset. In a lot of courts, pets still live on the property page, and paper decides who goes home. We'll call him Jasper here. The shelter called him Marble for one speckled paw. I changed it the day he pressed that paw into my palm like a stamp. The contract was simple. My name printed, my signature inked, the shelter director's name below. I booked the first vet visit and taped the booster schedule to my fridge. Every line said I was the owner. 2 weeks after Morgan moved out, a process server knocked. Packet, case number, inside the inventory, couch, table, car loan balance, and one adult mixed-breed dog Jasper with a neat checkmark by Morgan's name. That one line turned a living thing into leverage. I put my face in Jasper's neck and then started doing the only thing that beats talk: paper. Temporary orders decide the routine that usually turns into the final order, so the clock was running. I labeled a binder Jasper and made it boring on purpose. Front sleeve, the adoption contract, only my name and signature. Then vet records from day one owner. My name, invoices, food receipts, training enrollments, the trainer's attendance logs with my name on the leash side, and 2 neighbor statements saying who they see walking, feeding, and carrying him up the stairs when he's hurt. I wasn't going to argue feelings. I was going to point at pages. With the binder in place, my days split into 2 kinds: those spent in court facing preparation and those spent caring for Jasper. They overlapped more than I expected. Each morning at 6:05, I still took Jasper on his loop around the block, down Maple Street, past the cafe that always smells like burnt toast, up to the park and around the tiny pond where ducks fought for bread someone never threw. Jasper sniffed everything, yanked at the leash when he saw a squirrel, and mostly ignored other dogs unless they barked first. We'd get home at 6:45, I'd feed him, then sit at my kitchen table with coffee and comb through the binder. The binder grew slowly, like a baby plant. I added a section called Communications. In it, I printed every text message between Morgan and me about Jasper since separation dates, times, words. I highlighted phrases like, "He stays with me, not until the hearing, and see you in court." I didn't want to turn this into a personal attack. I wanted the judge to see the pattern. I was consistent in saying Jasper stayed with me pending a court order. Morgan's texts would show attempts to take him early. I had learned that judges pay attention to consistency. Because the hearing was weeks away, I had to maintain the status quo daily. I learned a new vocabulary from forums where people like me, pet owners and divorce, shared their experiences. Words like status quo, routine, separate property, premarital asset. They sounded dry, but they mattered. One woman wrote, "Treat your dog's routine like sacred ground. Judges do not like to disrupt routines unless there is clear reason." I took that to heart. I kept Jasper's feeding schedule rigid. I did not let Morgan come over unannounced. I did not let anyone else keep him overnight. When my friend Janine offered to host him for a weekend so I could relax, I politely declined. Relaxation could wait. Jasper could not. Morgan's lawyer filed a motion arguing that our dog was a marital asset. In some states, they argued, pets acquired during marriage are joint property regardless of the adoption contract. They cited cases from Maine and Vermont. I panicked for 20 minutes. Then I called the legal clinic again. The lawyer said, "In our state, the adoption contract matters. So does who paid the adoption fee. So do the vet records. Don't let them scare you with out-of-state cases. Bring the adoption contract. Bring your receipts. If they bring case law, print yours." I printed a case where a court in my state awarded a dog to the wife because she adopted him before marriage. I highlighted the part where the judge wrote, "A dog is property under the law, but the court may consider ownership evidence, care, and the animal's welfare." I added it to the binder. I also got copies of Jasper's microchip registration. I had registered him with my name and phone number. The registration certificate included my signature and the date. I put that behind the vet records. I printed the microchip registration email too. I printed the renewal notice from the microchip company that reminded me to update my contact information. It felt like overkill who collects these emails, but I reminded myself that if Morgan argued that they chipped Jasper too, I could show otherwise. A week before the hearing, Morgan left a message with my neighbor, Mr. Lewis, saying, "Tell me, I'm picking up Jasper Saturday at noon." Mr. Lewis texted me. M came by. said they're taking Jasper. I said, no, you're not. I thanked Mr. Lewis and added that text to the communications section. I called Morgan and left a voicemail. You are not picking up Jasper. We will follow temporary orders. Please don't involve the neighbors. Morgan didn't respond. I wondered what else they were planning. I slept poorly that night, the binder by my bed like a talisman. The Saturday in question came and went. I expected a showdown, maybe Morgan arriving with the police. Instead, nothing happened. I walked Jasper and came back to a quiet apartment. Morgan texted later that evening, "You're selfish." I saved the message. I didn't respond. After 3 months of careful preparation, I had learned that the best response was often none. On the day of the temporary hearing, I arrived early and sat outside the courtroom with my binder on my lap. People sat around me, clutching their own life binders. One man had a binder labeled Kids Schedule. A woman had a folder labeled House. We nodded to each other like commuters do on trains. When my case was called, I stood, binder open. The judge asked for the adoption contract. I handed it over. They asked for vet records. I handed them over. They asked if there was any documentation showing Morgan contributed financially to Jasper's care. I said no. Morgan's lawyer tried to introduce a photo of Morgan with Jasper at the beach as evidence of care. The judge said, "Photos show presence, not ownership." Morgan's lawyer scowled. The temporary order was issued as, I hoped. I walked out and felt like I could breathe. The temporary visits were awkward but civil. Morgan and I avoided eye contact. Jasper ran back and forth, tail a blur. Each time we met, Morgan tried to ask something outside the parameters. If I buy him a new bed, can I keep it at my place? Or if we have to travel, can I take him with me instead of boarding him? I stuck to the script. I'm following the court order. This is not about hurting you, it's about Jasper's routine. Morgan would sigh and throw the ball harder. Sometimes they smiled when Jasper did something silly like refusing to drop the ball. I saw glimpses of our old life, laughter over ridiculous dog antics, shared exasperation at his stubbornness. But then the hour ended and we went separate ways. As the final hearing approached, Morgan's attorney pivoted. They started talking about best interest of the animal. They filed a list of reasons why Jasper would thrive with Morgan: a backyard, flexible work hours, an upcoming move to a house with a dog park nearby. I didn't have those. I had an apartment with a 3-flight walk-up and a tiny strip of grass behind the dumpsters. I started to worry. What if a judge decided that a yard and flexible hours trump an adoption contract and consistency? I researched again. I found an article about judges considering the emotional well-being of the pet. It was a mixed picture. Some judges would grant joint custody. Others would award the pet to the person who could show they adopted it first and provided care. I couldn't control the yard argument, but I could control my narrative. I focused on the binder. I added another section labeled Living Arrangements. I printed my apartment lease addendum allowing pets under 40 pounds. I printed my property manager's email confirming that Jasper was approved. I printed a map of the park I took Jasper to daily with a note that it was a 10-minute walk from my apartment. I printed a calendar of my work schedule, highlighting my lunch breaks when I could come home to walk him. I printed the name and address of my dog sitter, Anna, along with our written agreement and payment receipts. Yes, my place was smaller, but I wanted the judge to see that Jasper was cared for, exercised, and socialized even without a yard. I also gathered letters from friends and family about my relationship with Jasper. My sister wrote, "I see my name with Jasper at every holiday. He brings Jasper to my house, watches him closely around my kids, and leaves early to get Jasper home to his routine." My coworker wrote, "We schedule shifts around my name walking his dog. He doesn't miss those walks." I didn't know if these letters would hold weight. I didn't know if the judge would allow them, but I included them anyway. It felt like building a safety net. A few days before the final hearing, Morgan called. I let it go to voicemail. Their message was surprisingly soft. "Hey, I know this has been hard. I still think he'd be happier with me. I want him. I think he's ours. But I also know you love him. Can we meet for coffee and talk?" I listened to the message twice. I sat with it. Then I called my therapist. She reminded me, "You're not obligated to negotiate outside of court. You've prepared for this. The court process is there for a reason. If you meet, be clear and strong." I decided not to meet. I texted Morgan. I'm not comfortable discussing this outside of the court process. Let's respect that. They responded with a thumbs up emoji. It felt like a ceasefire. The final hearing took place in a courtroom with fluorescent lights and beige walls. The judge sat at a high desk, flanked by flags. We sat at tables below. Morgan had counsel. I was pro se, representing myself. The judge asked if I was comfortable proceeding without an attorney. I said yes. They nodded. Morgan's attorney went first. They spoke about fairness and shared love. They reiterated the yard. They talked about Morgan's flexible schedule and their move. They presented a list of best interest factors, borrowed from child custody guidelines. They argued that Jasper deserved the best home. They proposed a joint custody arrangement, alternating weeks, shared expenses, shared vet decisions. Morgan sat and tried not to look at me. Their lawyer asked Morgan, "Do you love Jasper?" Morgan cried and said yes. They described teaching him tricks, buying him toys, going to the beach. They said, "He curls up with me on the couch." They said, "He comes to me when he hears my car." I felt my chest tighten. Some of those memories were true. I wanted to object. "He never curled up with you because you always shoved him off. He comes to you because he knows the sound of your old car." But I held my tongue. Facts. Focus on facts. Then it was my turn. I stood, binder in hand, voice shaking slightly. I thanked the court. I said, "This is not about denying Morgan's love for Jasper. He loves them too, but the law requires us to look at ownership and care. I adopted Jasper before we married. Here is the adoption contract with my name. Here are vet records from day one showing me as the responsible party. Here are receipts for food, training, and medical care paid by me. Here are statements from our trainer and neighbors about who walks him, feeds him, cares for him daily." I handed each section to the court clerk, who passed it to the judge. I spoke about routine. Jasper's routine has not changed. He still walks the same routes. He sees the same vet. He attends the same training. He knows my voice. He knows my schedule. Disrupting this could harm him. I admitted my apartment was small. It is not a yard. But dogs need routine and attention more than square footage. He gets daily exercise, mental stimulation, and continuous care. I quoted the case I found about separate property. The judge nodded, familiar with it. The judge examined the binder page by page. They asked Morgan's lawyer questions about the backyard. "Is your client living there now?" "They plan to move next month." The judge tilted their head. "Plans, art, addresses." They asked about Morgan's flexible schedule. "What hours?" Morgan answered. They asked me about my schedule. I answered. They asked about backup care. I showed the dog sitting agreement. The judge looked at the trainer's letter. "This says my name. Attended every class," they said. They looked at Morgan. "Did you ever attend?" Morgan said, "Yes, once." I saw their face flush. The judge wrote something. After hearing both sides, the judge asked if there was anything else. I took a breath and said one last thing I hadn't planned on. "He's not a couch," I said. "He's not property. But I know the court must treat him like that. So please treat him like property with attachments. He's attached to me. He knows my scent, my voice, my habits. I'm asking you to let that stability continue." I sat down. Morgan's attorney objected to my emotional plea. The judge overruled. "Closing statements can be emotional," they said. I exhaled quietly. The judge took the matter under advisement. They promised a ruling within a week. We left the courtroom. Morgan and I did not speak. We both hugged our lawyers, or in my case, hugged my binder, and walked out into a corridor that felt like every corridor in every courthouse, long, echoey, slightly cold. Jasper wasn't there. He was at home with Anna, sleeping on the couch, unaware of the building where decisions were being made about him. Waiting for the ruling was its own special kind of purgatory. Each day felt like a week. I updated my log, filed some emails, played fetch, cooked dinner, watched bad TV. Jasper lay on the floor and sighed in that way dogs do when their humans are boring. People texted, "Any news?" And I replied, "Not yet." I went to work and tried to focus on shelving products and assisting customers. My manager, a woman who had been through a divorce with 3 kids and 2 cats, patted my shoulder and said, "Hang in there. Courts don't move at human speed." She was right. On the 5th day, an envelope arrived from the court. My heart pounded. I put Jasper in his bed and sat at the kitchen table. I opened the envelope. Inside was a 3-page order. I read it once and then again. The court found that Jasper was separate property acquired by my name prior to the marriage. They noted that Morgan presented insufficient evidence of joint ownership. They referenced the adoption contract, the vet records, the receipts, the statements from the trainer and neighbors. They declared Jasper mine. They granted Morgan visitation rights, 2 hours a week at a location agreed upon by both parties. They admonished Morgan's counsel for misstatements, and they warned both parties that any violation of the order would result in sanctions. I laughed and cried at the same time. I slid the order into the binder behind the adoption contract. I texted Morgan, "We have the ruling. Jasper is awarded to me. Visitation is 2 hours weekly. I'll send details." They replied, "I figured. Thanks for the notice." There was no emoji. I wondered if they were angry, sad, relieved. It wasn't my job to guess. I wrote out a schedule with dates and times for visits and emailed it to Morgan through our lawyers. They agreed. The visits resumed, a little less tense, still formal. Jasper greeted Morgan, then came back to me. Morgan sometimes stroked his fur and looked wistful. I did not gloat. I reminded myself that love can coexist with boundaries. Now that the court battles ended, I faced a different kind of reality. Life after litigation. The binder went into a fireproof box under my bed. The binder was no longer a weapon, it was a safeguard. I returned to a semblance of ordinary. I took Jasper to the vet for his annual shots. The vet, who had testified by statement in my case, smiled and said, "Glad to see you both." I said, "Me too." I told the vet about the ruling. They nodded knowingly. "The law will catch up," they said. I wasn't sure. The law tends to lag behind love. Friends invited me out again. For months, I had declined invitations because I feared leaving Jasper alone too long. I accepted now. At dinner, someone asked, "Would you adopt again knowing what you know?" I said yes without thinking. I realized it was true. The pain of the fight did not outweigh the joy of Jasper. The fight taught me that love requires documentation in places where hearts don't suffice. I hoped I would never have to use those lessons again, but I would adopt again. Maybe I'd adopt a cat if my lease allowed it. Maybe I'd adopt a senior dog. Maybe I'd volunteer at a shelter, help someone else build their binder before they needed it. The idea made me smile. One morning, Anna knocked on my door. She held a small potted plant with bright green leaves. "This is for Jasper," she said. "It's lavender. Dogs like it. Put it near his bed. It might calm him." I placed the pot near the window. Jasper sniffed it, sneezed, and walked away. Anna laughed. "Well, maybe it calms you," she said. It did. Each time I watered it, I thought about the people who helped me. Anna, Mr. Lewis, the trainer, the free legal clinic, my therapist, my manager, my sister. I realized that while the court required paper, my life required people. They weren't in the order. They were in my heart. A year passed. Jasper's muzzle got a little grayer. He started to do an adorable little old man trot, where his back legs moved stiffer than his front. He still barked at squirrels like they had insulted his lineage. He still hated raincoats. He still loved sleeping with his chin on my foot. Morgan's visits dwindled to once a month. Sometimes Morgan texted, "Mind if I skip this week?" I always said, "Sure." I didn't want to hold them to a schedule they didn't want. If they showed up, we'd sit on benches and talk about Jasper's age, his diet, his vet, his stubbornness. We avoided other topics. It worked for both of us. My therapist asked me to write down what I would do differently if I had to do it again. I wrote, "Document early, document everything. Don't assume kindness will govern court proceedings. Keep emotions in check in court. Let people help. Rest. Eat. Walk." I wrote, "Take pictures with date stamps." I wrote, "Register the microchip." I wrote, "Start the binder on the adoption day." I wrote, "Don't share the binder until you have to." I also wrote, "Love your dog like courts don't exist, but prepare like they do." It felt cynical, but it was honest. One evening, Morgan called unexpectedly. I answered. They sounded different. "I'm moving out of state next month," they said. "I wanted to say goodbye to Jasper. Can I come over?" My immediate reaction was to guard. The court order did not allow home visits, but I also felt something else, generosity. I thought about Jasper. He had loved Morgan. I didn't want him to be confused by a sudden absence. I said, "Let me check the order." It said, "Visitation must be agreed upon by both parties, location flexible." I said, "You can come over for an hour on Saturday, the backyard. I'll be there." Morgan agreed. On Saturday, Morgan arrived with a small bag. They knelt and hugged Jasper, tears running down their cheeks. Jasper licked Morgan's face, tail wagging. Morgan said, "I'm so sorry, buddy." They looked at me and said, "I shouldn't have tried to claim him as property. He is yours. And I'm sorry I put you through that." I said, "Thank you." It felt like a release, like closing a page. Morgan gave Jasper a new toy and a bag of treats. They stroked his head one last time and left. Jasper looked at me, toy in mouth, and wagged. I threw it. He chased it. Life after that moment was quieter. The binder under my bed gathered dust. Jasper and I walked the block 1,000 more times. Winter came and went, spring arrived, and my lavender plant grew tall. A friend adopted a dog and asked me to be her emergency contact. I said yes and printed her adoption contract for her binder. I went to the shelter and donated money with Jasper's name written on the envelope. The shelter director smiled and said, "We remember Jasper. He was marble then. He's famous." I laughed and thought, famous for a paw that made a contract bulletproof. The story stretched into years. Jasper grew old in ways I could not anticipate. His eyes clouded, his knees stiffened, he slept more. He still ate with gusto, still barked when someone knocked on the door, still wagged when he saw Anna. One day, he couldn't get up easily. I carried him down the stairs. I was grateful for the weight of him in my arms, grateful that I could carry him, grateful that I had fought for the right to carry him. I promised him, as I promised myself, that I would carry him for as long as he needed. As his 12th year turned to 13, he struggled. The vet said, "It might be time." My stomach turned. I went home and sat with him on the kitchen floor, just as I had after the process server's knock. I thought about the binder under my bed. It could not help with this decision. Paper held no comfort here. I looked into his cloudy eyes and said, "You tell me." He looked away, then leaned his head into my lap. I knew. I called Morgan. "He's ready," I said. They cried. They asked if they could be there. I said yes. We met at the vet's office, an old building with walls painted a comforting green. Jasper lay on a blanket. I stroked his head. Morgan stroked his paw. The vet injected a clear liquid. Jasper's breathing slowed, then stopped. He was gone. I had never felt anything like it. It was like a thread snapped. I held my hand on his chest longer than I had to. Morgan cried quietly. I cried louder. The vet left us alone. We sat in silence. Eventually, Morgan said, "Thank you for letting me be here." I said, "You loved him. He loved you. I wouldn't have it any other way." Jasper's death taught me a new lesson about paperwork. In my grief, I remembered to close his microchip registration, to inform the vet, to cancel his licenses. It felt mechanical and cruel, but I did it. I added a sheet to the binder. Death certificate, Jasper. I wrote the date. I closed the binder one last time. It felt heavier than ever. People ask me now, was it worth it? They mean the fight, the binder, the court. I say yes. Not because it was fun. It wasn't. It took time, money, tears. It took me to a place where I had to prove my love. But love deserves proof. Not for the one you love. Jasper never needed proof, but for the world that would separate you if you don't have it. It was worth it because I kept Jasper's world consistent. It was worth it because he died with me in my arms, knowing nothing of courtrooms. It was worth it because of the everyday moments. The way he looked up when I said his name, the way he leaned on my leg when thunder cracked, the way he learned to roll over after many attempts, the way he grew old, the way he let me hold him at the end. If you're listening to this and think, "I hope I never go through that," I hope you never do. But if you do, here is my advice. Start the binder on the day you adopt. Keep it updated. Take pictures with timestamps. Save receipts. Register the microchip. Keep neighbors in your life. They see things and can testify. Do the work. And then love your dog like courts don't exist. Throw the ball. Let them on the couch. Let them sleep with their chin on your boot. Document the mundane. Protect the sacred. And if someone in a room full of relatives calls you a burden, remember, you are not the thing they need to cut from their life. You might be the tether to something real. Let them go. Hold on to your dog. Hold on to your binder. Hold on to yourself. And never underestimate the power of a manila folder and a stack of receipts. They held more weight in court than any tear I shed. They shouldn't have, but they did. If that's the rule, then play by it and win. I sometimes wonder if Jasper, in some dog way, knew what we fought for. Probably not. Dogs don't care about court orders, they care about scent, routine, tone. But maybe he sensed my stress. Maybe he leaned a little harder during those nights when the binder glowed on the table. Maybe his tail wagged a little slower because he knew I needed calm. Maybe he simply existed, and that was enough. The fight was about me, about law, about proving what hearts know intuitively. He didn't know, and that's the gift. He lived his life oblivious to paperwork because I handled the paperwork. That's what we do for those we love. We handle the unseen so they can live in peace. Now, when I walk past the park where we used to do exchanges with Morgan, I think about those days. They seem like a different lifetime. The grass looks the same. The ducks still fight over bread. I sometimes see a couple there with a dog. They toss a ball back and forth, trading smiles. The dog runs, brings the ball to one person, then to the other. I hope they never have to fight for the right to throw that ball. I hope they never have to prove they bought the ball or paid the adoption fee. I hope they never have to learn what receipts matter. But if they do, I want to tell them. Get a binder, label it early, and keep your heart open while your hand writes. Because love is both a feeling and an act. It's an emotion and a document. It's a leash and a line on a form. It's messy. It's mundane. It's worth it. So, when you ask me now, why did you fight so hard? I can answer without flinching, because Jasper wasn't mine just to possess. He was mine to protect. Because love without protection is hope. Love with protection is a promise kept. And because one day, when a judge looked at the adoption contract and said, "He's yours," I heard Jasper's bark in my head and said, "I know, stay safe."